Welcome to the Faith and Trauma Center podcast, a unique approach to exploring the intersections of religion, trauma, sacred spaces, and mental health.
Each month, we choose a different topic to discuss weekly from different perspectives. The first week, we explore the faith, community, and clergy perspective. The second week, the mental health practitioner perspective. The third week, the perspective of individuals working to heal from religious trauma. And the fourth week, we invite a special guest who has been impacted by our monthly topic to join us.
This format follows the design of the Faith and Trauma Center's 3 pathways for resources and education. We invite you to explore all the additional material that we offer at faithandtraumacenter.org.
Let's jump into this week's conversation.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Faith and Trauma Center podcast. I am your host, Christy Love, joined by my co-host, good friend, and co-founder of the Faith and Trauma Center, Hailey Mitsui. And collectively, you and I are joined today by a new friend. So I want to welcome Hailey Mitsui to the podcast today. Hailey, how are you?
Oh, I'm trucking along. I feel like that's my answer always these days. Just trucking along.
Trucking along. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like everyone's kind of got a go-to answer these days.
Yeah.
And if you try to push much past that, everything just kind of caves.
Exactly.
And we're
Exactly.
a big ball of anxiety.
How much time do you have?
Exactly. Exactly. So, well, Hailey, we always start with a quick check-in. So I'm going to make this one really easy and simple. Give me a takeaway from Thanksgiving for all of you. How was Thanksgiving? What was maybe a memory or kind of a funny situation that happened? Something that kind of stands out to you from the holiday season thus far. So, Hailey, I'm going to start with you. Do you have a Thanksgiving takeaway?
I even knew the question, and now I'm my brain is having to process this. We had a lovely week. It was wonderful. It was a week of we literally midway through the week had the weather transition happen. So we went from being the weird, somewhat fall weather, and all of a sudden winter happened in the middle of the week on Thanksgiving Day. And so there was a lot with my family. We had the whole week off together. So we just did a lot of art together, did yoga every day with the kiddos. We were outside in nature every day. So it was just a lot of life-giving things. But then we also felt a little bit spoiled because we took our anniversary money that we got in October. My husband and I celebrated 11 years together, and we went and saw Wicked. And then the next day, we took the kids and we went and saw Zootopia 2 because we had been gifted that. So we did something fun with the kids, and that's what they wanted to do. And so I feel like my break was this life-giving, beautiful, just this time set apart for rest and energy and lots of creativity, lots of time just spent getting to enjoy the outdoors. And then we got to see these movies that were very lots of beautiful political messages on just inclusivity and the people will rise and a lot of these messages. So there was a lot of empowerment, but it came from the movies. So that was kind of my takeaway was this rest and in the name of Advent season being there is hope. This season is hard and there's just so much suffering everywhere around us, but there's hope. And so amidst the rest, there was this renewal of we're gonna fight thanks to Wicked and Zootopia.
There you go. For our listeners who've heard Hailey say so many times, I could do a whole podcast on children's movies and all the themes. Hailey calls me after Zootopia and says, we have to do a podcast because I need to talk about this movie. So I'm sure it is coming in 2026, a Hailey-esque kids movie, all the lessons that we can learn from the different kids movies you've seen lately. So
Yes.
yeah. Hailey, how about you? How was Thanksgiving for you? How do you celebrate? What's a tradition maybe that you guys like to honor?
Yeah, Thanksgiving is, I always enjoy. It's a low-key holiday. And I always, despite the problematic origins of the holiday, I appreciate the invitation to reflect and be grateful. So we co-house with my parents, my spouse and I. So my parents are downstairs, we're upstairs, and we just had my little sister and her boyfriend over, and then another friend who didn't have a place to go, and we all had a lovely dinner here at my house, and then went and did dessert with my extended family. But my friend who came to our family, like dinner, it was like 3 p.m. eating,
Yeah.
classic like Thanksgiving time. She brought this amazing, I don't remember the name, this amazing dessert that tasted like this like deep fried fortune cookie. And she
Ooh.
showed me pictures on how she made it. And she said she got the mold from Thailand. So I'm assuming it's a Thai dessert, but it's like, um, yeah, I can only describe it as like a deep fried fortune cookie flour. So if
Mm.
anyone knows what that's called, let me know. But it was fantastic. And then I took the leftovers to my extended family and then pretend that I made it, but I fessed up very, very like early that I didn't actually make them. But I enjoyed the glory for about 20
For,
seconds before
for
I,
just a little bit.
yeah,
Yeah.
before I fessed
Yeah.
up.
I was gonna say
Yeah.
it's hard to pass those off because then everyone wants to know how you did it and
Well, I
what
know.
is
I
it, and you're
literally
like,
had my friend send me a picture. She's like, I was like, send me a picture of you making these so I can pretend that I can show, so I can pretend, oh yeah, look it. this is how I did it. So I
oh,
was pretty thoughtful in my lie, but I couldn't, I couldn't get away with it.
I love this.
Yeah. What
that's
about you, Christy?
fantastic. Oh, so Thanksgiving for me is typically kind of a ministry outreach day. So my family and I have a pretty long tradition of trying to make sure that we do Thanksgiving in a way where if people don't have a place to go, they can always come and spend Thanksgiving at our table. And so this year, this was the first time that we hosted Thanksgiving at our new church in our new ministry context here in Washington State. And so, yeah, we had about 15 that joined us, and it was lovely. It was great to cook in a nice big kitchen and not be in my little kitchen in my house and come home to a clean house when I was done. But we had a really good time together. We had a really wide representation of generations that gathered for that meal. So it was really neat to just kind of listen to them, talk about their concerns, their heartbreak over different reasons that maybe they were at our Thanksgiving this year, as opposed to with family who maybe they have become estranged from, or family isn't safe right now for a lot of different reasons, whether that was gender identity or people that they love not being accepted, or politics that are really different right now. There were a wide range of reasons, as well as some individuals who are much older and just don't have living family anymore, and this being some of the first years they're navigating that. So it was a good and beautiful day. I also had a chance the night before Thanksgiving to participate in an interfaith service at the Catholic Church here in Yakima, and it was really sweet. We had about 6 different faith leaders there that represented different faith traditions, and we just kind of each went around and shared what does faith or Thanksgiving mean to us. And it's not uncommon in those spaces that I'm the only woman clergy in that space. But it was really interesting afterwards. I had 2 people come up to me, both from denominations that do not ordain women, very patriarchal spaces, who came up and said, I live over by your church, and I just want you to know that your church sign gives me life. And that was really exciting, because for those of you that have been listening for a while, like, take our church sign really seriously as like this opportunity to show that not every faith space may be what we're seeing and hearing in the news right now. And so that was really exciting to have that moment and be grateful for those connections and to kind of build trust amongst those communities. So that was a little bit of my Thanksgiving, but let's jump in. I'm excited to talk to you, Hailey, and kind of just see where this conversation takes us. So Hailey and I met, gosh, a few months ago now.
Yeah.
It was kind of an interesting random shared connection. I was at a meeting. And someone that I was at this meeting with said, hey, you do a lot of work with religious trauma. I was just talking to this person who also does work with religious trauma. I think you 2 should meet. I was like, absolutely. Like, send me her contact information. And so I sent you a message, Hailey, just out of the blue. we set up a Zoom call, had a lovely conversation, and then thought, let's get you on the podcast and let's just, have a chance to get to know you better and kind of share. So, you wear a lot of different hats. I know you are a spiritual director. You are a somatic coach. Talk to me a little bit about your journey, that kind of has led you to the work that you're doing right now.
Yeah, yeah. Yes. So I have a private practice as a spiritual director and a somatic coach, and it's sort of been this evolving practice over the last 4 years. But I grew up in a very fundamentalist religious space. I grew up exposed to actually a lot of different spiritualities in a way. I made a lot of pilgrimages out to Yakima because my family is from Wapato outside of Yakima and is Buddhist. And so we would make our pilgrimages for death anniversaries at the temple. And so, I had exposure to other religions, but for the most part, I was very immersed in like evangelical Christianity of the 90s and 2000s. I had a purity ring. I went to a choir of the fire. I burned all my secular CDs, I I called things secular, which is in and of itself like an indication of growing up in that very, 2000s Christian culture. And I think and I also grew up like very immersed in the world of social justice. My grandparents were activists throughout my dad's childhood. My dad's very active in social justice issues, and I have been also my whole life. And my faith and my action always felt really connected and like they reinforced each other. And I think like, as my world and awareness got bigger, it felt like the religion I had inherited, that very fundamentalist interpretation of scripture, kind of stayed the same size. And I didn't really know what to do with that. I was like, I believe my spirituality is expanding as I travel the world and I meet new people and I meet good people all in all walks of life. But the particular container of the evangelical religion like couldn't grow. And that was really paralyzing for me. And I think I tried to sort of shove myself into that box for many years because I am also a person who loves belonging and deeply desires belonging. And so knowing that I could push back a little bit, but if I pushed back too much, I was going to get the boot. Like I knew that. And I made those compromises for a long time in order to keep that sense of belonging. And I don't really know how much into detail you want me to get, but I feel like there were a few breaking points maybe along the way. One was like when I was in high school, I say I grew up very fundamentalist, and that is true because my parents, for reasons that remain unknown to me, sent me to a very conservative private Christian school. But the family church I grew up at was a Japanese American United Methodist Church, relatively progressive. But one of our pastors came out as queer when I was in high school, and the church, totally divided over it. And I had this feeling, even as, a 17, 18-year-old, and I knew that the Bible said being gay was wrong. And for those of you that are listening, I'm saying that in quotes. I have finger quotes going on. So even though I quote unquote knew that's what the Bible said, my spirit couldn't wrap its little mind around like one day this whole church being like, we love this pastor and she leads us so well, to then she tells us this thing and then half the people are like, oh, I can't be here anymore. I was like, that doesn't make sense. Like I can't wrap my head around that. I think that was like one big break that happened for me. And then fast forward many, many years, like 2013, 2014, Black Lives Matter movements is like it's taking off or gaining momentum, because all of these young unarmed Black men are being shot in the streets. And I was at a church in San Diego at the time and was a worship leader. And I said something from stage about it and I got in trouble, and I was directly told like, We're not talking about that because we don't want to make people uncomfortable. And what I heard is, oh, you don't want to make white people uncomfortable. And, oh, those are the people you care about. And that was another, moment of like, oh, there's a really specific person you have to be fully valued. And not only am I not that person, I'm tired of protecting this institution that is centering only white heterosexual men, basically, right? And I went through this free fall deconstruction, just like, like I described it as like, I felt like I never knew if I was going to hit the ground. I was so disoriented because the church, not just Christianity, but the church had been foundational to my whole life. It was a place I found belonging. It was a place I got to use my talents. It was a place that, I got to find that sense of community. And that felt like it got ripped out from underneath me, in a second, as I'm sure has happened to like a lot of people that are listening to this. And in that free fall is when someone told me about spiritual direction, which I had never heard about before. And I'm so lucky to have been referred to this woman who is still my spiritual director to this day. Probably, oh my gosh, how long have we been seeing each other? I mean, I started, it doesn't matter. Over a decade, I've been working with this same woman, and she helped me put language to so much of what I was experiencing. She also introduced me to contemplative Christianity, to the mystics, to Richard Rohr, to Cynthia Bourgeois, to James Finley, to these teachers that, I was like, oh my gosh, when I heard the way that they talked about cosmic Christ and the divine, I was like, yes, that is it. That is what I have not had the words for, but I have known in my spirit. And I'm mixed race, I identify as queer, and my spiritual director was and is a lovely straight white lady. And I was like, I wish there were more people who like looked like me, that were accompanying people like me. I feel like the most disenfranchised group within Christianity and a lot of organized religion are queer BIPOC people that are just leaving the church in droves. And I always say, I don't actually care if people stay Christian personally. That is not, I don't care about that. What I care about is that if people leave this tradition, like this sacred tradition, because they don't know that there is a different expression of Christianity, that they don't know that there is an expansive way that we can all exist in our fullness. We don't have to chop off parts of ourselves to belong. And so that is where, that's where my practice was birthed out of. I primarily work with queer and trans people and BIPOC people recovering from religious trauma who are efforting to recreate spiritual practices that feel supportive, that aren't rooted in shame, that integrate ancestral practices. And my somatic practice came alongside that because I realized very quickly in my own journey and while accompanying people that this stuff is so embodied. Right? This religious trauma, when you're told since you're a little one that like, am I allowed to swear or no swear?
Absolutely swear.
Okay.
We call it holy language around here.
Okay.
Absolutely.
What I was going to say is like, if you're told from a young age that like, you're a pile of shit and Jesus had to die for you to have like, for God to even be able to look at you. I mean, what are we telling people about our bodies, about our beings, right? And then add on to that purity culture and white supremacy and patriarchy, right? So the somatic training that I went through was really to continue to support myself and others that are recovering from this deeply embodied spiritual trauma. So that's a lot. But I'll end there. Just see what that brings up for you guys.
Yeah, I think there's so many threads there to pull on. And I'm excited for you and Holly to unpackage a little bit. I want to kind of tug on that last thread that you just talked about really quickly, because, you talk about that internalized piece, right, in religious trauma and the way that we devalue our bodies, the way that we devalue ourselves and our self-image. And, I talk on here a lot about the importance of stories and statistics, right? So at the Faith and Trauma Center, we do a lot of research work. We are currently in the middle of a 3-year research project right now with something that we call the Negative Religious Experiences Study. And that's based upon a large case study that I did as part of my doctoral program. And in that case study, one of the things that we were able to identify that I'm so passionate about us really capturing good data around is so that we can further that conversation that you're talking about, Hailey. Like we saw a huge number of participants in that study who report ongoing chronic pain. We see a large number of participants in that study who report being overweight or obesity, or they cite that overeating, how to deal with stress and kind of that, self-harming behavior, cutting, eating disorders, like all of those kind of things are critical for us to be able to name in tangent with a lot of these religious trauma experiences that happen and the way that our body stores those things. And so I appreciate that focus that you're bringing in, because I think it's just really starting to gain momentum in practitioners who are doing this work to be able to really make that connection to our bodies, our hearts, our emotions, and really holistically say, like, okay, we can't just deal with what we've traditionally called church hurt, right? Like we've got to deal with what that wound did to every single piece of us. And so I appreciate you lifting that up.
Mm-hmm. Um, I can definitely see why Christy said that I would love you.
Okay, I like to overpromise and underdeliver, so I hope that wasn't overhyped.
I feel like there's some synergy with a lot of things. I also grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s, where that was so much. So I also had a purity ring, and like purity culture was the thing. Like the Eldridges that wrote those, they captivate all that. I went to high school with their son. So I knew.
Oh, wow.
So there was a lot of like that was just so immersive for me. I also was raised in this very odd dynamic where my parents put me and my sister in this very conservative Christian school, where we heard a lot of that stuff, like language around people who are queer being bad, and I would like that never made sense to me, and there was so much language that never made sense to me. Like I started deconstructing at 6 years old. Like I can like put an age on that. But I was told so much about like you are bad, and especially as a woman, like you are tempting all of your brothers in Christ, in that language that was just so it was, but it became so much of this like piece of who I was and who I was striving to be, I guess, not who I was. Like I was at war with that. And then I was also raised by parents who loved the natural world. And so I was raised with this like the world is bad, like we're bad and everything of the world is bad. But then like my mom would spend 8 hours watching hummingbirds, and my dad would take me backpacking. And so there was this like even in that it was like this doesn't make sense, because how can a God who created hummingbirds be bad like that, or like create a world that's bad? Like that doesn't make any sense to me. And so there was a lot of that. And then I wrestled with a lot of mental health. There was a lot of sexual trauma in my life, and so there were those pieces. And so what I honestly, after like years and years now of walking this journey of healing, and went through some really massive deconstruction that just like kind of was fast paced over the last decade, walking with Christy through the journey of her feeling called to be a pastor and being told she had the right calling but the wrong genetics, and like all of these things. And I think for me, one of the big things, like this big turning point to me, was this recognition in me of when I looked to like the lowest times of my life, where I was drinking and I was sleeping around and I was cutting and I was doing all of these things, how much of that was like this attempt for me just to try to feel in my body again, because religious trauma had made me so disembodied, and the sexual trauma on top of that, and how I was just living like I didn't know who I was, and I couldn't feel anymore. Like I couldn't feel. And at the same time feeling so many huge emotions as an empath, and I didn't know what to do with that. And I've been so grateful and so lucky that I've gotten to like deconstruct alongside Christy. And we've been best friends for over a decade now, and 12 years, 13, something like that now, a really long time. And my partner, like we've been in that journey together. And so I've been really grateful for that space. And in fact, like my parents have deconstructed. And so that's been a weird privilege that I've had in that space. But finding somatic practices and finding yoga and really investing in the actual traditions of yoga was really important to me because it helped me realize like this is not just a you need to go to therapy or you need to like have someone who can help support you in your deconstruction. Like there is so much learning how to be re-embodied that is actually going to touch the core of those wounds. And so as you're talking about that, like I was just getting really excited and I would love to give you a little bit more room to talk about that because I think there's so many people who would say that like I have been so disembodied for so long, but then there's also a lot of people that don't have never experienced what it feels like to like live in your body, to love your body, to love who you are in your body, like to be able to be in touch with emotions and experiences and spirituality in a way that's like, this is me and this is who I am.
Yeah. Yeah. As you were sharing, I just kept hearing one of my somatic teachers is Resma Menakem, who wrote a fantastic book called My Grandmother's Hands. And his refrain, I mean, I've heard him say it so often, is just, you are not defective.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's like, I've seen, every person just brought to tears when he just stops them in whatever they're saying, and just says, you are not defective. You are not defective. Yeah. And because there's this belief, right? There is just this deep, deep seated knowing and quote unquote knowing that like we are broken. And what I'm hearing you say is this like journey to connection. I often think of like I don't know how I feel about healing in general. That's kind of a whole nother conversation, probably for a whole nother time. And
another time you can come back. We'll unpackage that on a different podcast.
I'm like, I don't even really know what that means. So what I come back to a lot is like, is connection. Yeah. More than healing. And I think of connection to self, connection to the divine, and connection to people, planet. And that, and that's kind of the journey I'm hearing you say, Holly, is like this being in this place of freeze. That's also what I'm hearing, like that disconnection, all this trauma, creating this freeze state in the body, which thank God, who knows what you would have done if you weren't in a freeze state, right? Your system probably couldn't have handled the intensity of everything you've been through. And so it was protecting itself in this freeze state until you had the capacity to slowly, heal or move towards connection in those places. But yeah, that like, I feel like I kind of lost my train of thought because I just got a little bit like emotional thinking of you, thinking of little you navigating all of those things and being so grateful that your system knew to sort of put on this protective armor until you were in a safe enough place to integrate those things, which it sounds like has happened and is to happen, which is amazing.
And our bodies and nervous systems incredible that we have those protective, like those things that I used to hate, that I hated that I existed in freeze for so long, and like and now can be grateful. And I work with so many people where I'm able to name that. Like that's a beautiful gift that our bodies have that ability to care for ourselves that way. But the problem is like we've often not been taught how to come out of that, or how to do that in a way that is safe, and when you're safe enough to do that.
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
And I think too, Holly, you and I've talked about this a little bit, but one of the things that I think corporate religion does us such a disservice in is it depersonalizes everything, right? And so everything becomes so systemized. And it becomes, this large sermon to a giant room full of people. And like, here's how to do it, right? Here's the 4 steps to a happy, healthy marriage. Here's the 4 steps to raising really great kids. Here's the 3 steps to healing your religious trauma. Like, everything is done in such a big way, but every person comes out of a freeze state uniquely and differently.
Mm-hmm.
And Hailey, you talked about that phrase from My Grandmother's Hands, which the book I absolutely love and adore. But it made me think of the scene from Good Will Hunting, where Matt Damon and Robin Williams are in the room together. I don't know if anybody's seen this film or you remember this scene, but Matt Damon is sitting like leaned up against a desk, I believe, and his head's kind of down. And Robin Williams is like, it's not your fault. And he, Matt Damon just kind of nods. And Robin Williams says it again. It's not your fault. And he nods a little deeper. It's not your fault. And he looks up at him and makes eye contact. It's not your fault, right? And like every time that he says that, you just watch. Like, it's, to me, it's one of the most powerful film depictions of someone coming out of that freeze response, because here's a young man who's blamed himself and internalized all these things for so long, and every time that phrase is spoken over him, the reaction deepens, and like you just see this crack and these like pieces just melting away that they've held on to for so long, until finally it's not your fault is just met with this outpouring of tears and emotions that have been blocked for so long. And I think that's one of the reasons I appreciate the importance and the role of spiritual direction in religious trauma healing, because I think we can talk about things in concepts and we can look at, patterns and trends and all of these things, but healing is so individual and healing is so unique. And we need people that are willing to come beside us in those journeys. And whether that's spiritual direction or, finding a really great religious trauma support group that's done well and not done poorly and only adds more problems, which we've seen too. I think it's so important that we recognize, right? We don't heal alone. That's not a solo activity.
Yeah. I also just want to name and just elevate your calling in this, because I think that, well, I, like, as a white woman, like, I had so much harm because of my gender, because I was a woman, like, in a religious trauma space. But I've had the privilege of being white and, having ancestors that come from Scandinavia and Ireland, and like, and I've learned how to honor like the complicated identities of that. I grieve just how much more complicated it is for people of color, for people who are queer, and how much, like, when you're talking about the fact that there are so many voices out there and there's so many people doing such good things, but to feel like when you're processing and you're maybe feeling like that, like, I am not good enough, or I've been told this because of organized religion for so long, and then to have someone who is queer or someone who is a person of color look at you and say you are not broken or you are good enough, that some of those language, like, how much more beautiful that can mean, because we need to have people that identify with us, that have walked the journey that we've walked, have that, like, for that help, to help with that connection, if I'm saying that right. Like,
Totally.
I validate, or not validate, but just want to elevate that in you, how your sensitivity to that calling is just so beautiful, and I'm so grateful that you exist in this world.
Oh, thanks, Holly. That's so very kind. And I receive that gratitude, and I think of how part of, I think of the Me Too movement and just that phrase Me Too, right? Like how validating, how unisolating that is to, it's not just like, oh, I'm sorry that happened to you, or like I grieve with you, or I can't believe that happened. It's like, yeah, man, that happened to me too. It's just this like,
Mhm.
oh, thank God I'm not the only one. And I think
Mhm.
about that a lot, how like capitalism and white supremacy, especially, how they really um capitalize or emphasize isolation, right? As
Mhm.
like a form of control. If we think we're the only ones,
Mhm.
then we lose a lot of our power. And
Mhm.
so I did notice the more I just talked about like it's kind of like this weird thing that happened to me or this weird thing that happened to me, you know, the more I just talked about it, the more people I had just kind of popping out of the woodwork being like just talking to me about what they'd been through. And I think that's, you know, I'm sure that the both of you have experienced this too. It's like it's such a mark of like being called to be a healer in the community is you're doing it already, right? Like
Mhm.
you don't have to have a degree or a certification to like to be doing this accompanying work. You're often the people that
Mhm.
people are just coming to, and that's what I felt like was kind of happening. Like just people that looked like me or had similar experiences were kind of finding me and wanting to process things, and I was like, oh yeah. And it was the mutuality in that is so important, right? It's just as healing to me to know I'm not alone as it is for someone else to like know they're.
Mm.
Yeah.
I-
So, I mean, I think that there's a way to take this conversation and kind of flip this imagery a little bit and talk about this also, Hailey, what you're talking about, that isolation. And when we're not connecting with one another, we're not sharing our stories, it does feel like we're all alone. Nobody understands. And so, like, that becomes kind of the self-insulating, and it's difficult to heal in that space. I think a lot about the church, and I think a lot about as we talk about like somatics and the harm that our own bodies go through, I can't help but think about that same kind of concept in the body of Christ with air quotes, right? Like that language that many of us in the evangelical church were raised to use and to talk about. And I think we've said it here several different times. So like I want to tug on that thread for a second. Like I talked about at the beginning, that gratitude from other faith leaders who I would perceive as pretty conservative faith leaders saying like your church sign is badass and like that gives me life and that's
Mhm.
like driving part of what I'm doing. And Hailey, you were talking about that earlier too, just that kind of idea of showing somebody something different than maybe what they see lifted up in our culture right now. I think that form of bringing healing to what is faith and kind of revisiting this concept of spirituality, right? We, again, that corporate Christian, corporate church piece that looks at like branded Christianity um, is so threatened by the word spirituality, right? That how dare that? So it's almost like the inverse of what we're naming here, that like in healing, we've got to come together, but also we've got to have the courage and faith to step out and to pursue something that's unique and personal and not just the cookie cutter and the copy and paste and this is what I've been told, so it must be so. And that spirituality piece of exploring that and where does that take you and the contemplative pieces of that and being willing to ask the questions that you've never been willing to ask. I think that's also important to kind of lean into here in our time together.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, it makes me there's so much that comes up as I hear you kind of reflect that. The first thing that comes to mind is like um ran away from the label Christian for a very long time.
Mhm.
And now I just like wear it all the time. I'm just waving my Christian flag because of, I think a little bit because of what you're saying, like it has become politicized. And I mean that, yes, politics, but I just mean that in the way of like it is um like it is an identity, right? It
Mhm.
has like a role in society. And there's a lot of really loud examples of what a
Mhm.
Christian is. And it feels like it feels important to demonstrate, to show that there are other versions, you know?
Yeah.
And I also have a podcast. It's not the most active podcast. I have a podcast called Embodied Spirituality, and I had a conversation with a friend who started Christians for Free Palestine, was one of the co-founders of Christians for Free Palestine, and he's a Palestinian American, and he's like, let's remember, his name's Jonathan, and he's like, let's remember that Christianity is an indigenous Palestinian wisdom tradition, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that is its origins.
Mm-hmm.
And what we see now is a nationalistic version of a capitalist religion. And that doesn't mean that there aren't these beautiful parts of the wisdom tradition that are still present there. But like, let's not pretend that that is what Christianity universally is. And so, yeah, there's this need to, you know, actually, I would love to hear one or both of you talk a little bit more maybe about what you mean by kind of the healing the body, because I want to make sure I'm sort of tracking with that as well, like how the healing of the body of Christ in connection to the like healing of the individual body as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, especially as someone who is full-time clergy, right? So I'm in ministry work in faith community spaces and predominantly Christian spaces and interfaith spaces all day long. I think one of the things that I really have to lament and grieve and acknowledge daily right now is not just the divisions that we see that have happened in our culture, right? But what those divisions have done and are doing into our faith communities. I think that's the language I want to use. And this feeling of like, we come into a space and is this a safe space? Are you a safe Christian? Are you that kind of Christian? Is this a branded? Is this a like, there's like this posturing that has to happen. And I think when we talk about the way that our bodies hold that tension, I think there's also kind of a collective tension that exists in like in the religious community right now, right? This tension of like progressive Christians trying to kind of do this work of reclaiming and this very nationalistic, and you've got so many different pieces of that I think are fracturing, and you've got people that are questioning. And so I just think about like the imagery of that body, which we've been taught to use for so long and is, rooted in scripture. But I think about like what happens when a body is divided against itself, right? And like when it's constantly fighting itself. Um, and how do we, as spiritual directors, as clergy, as somatic yoga practitioners, and people that are trying to do these healing modalities and support pieces, both for the individual, but for many of our listeners, we're also called to also try to find some common ground, some healing work that helps to bring people together in community as well. And so, like, what does that look like to have this reclamation on our spiritual journey and wrestling with what you're talking about, the same thing, that we talk about here a lot. Like, how do we reclaim what that is and what that is not? And how do we do that in a way that says, yes, we do need community to heal from what we've experienced in the past, but also making sure that people understand that there are safe places to do that when there's so much division in terms of the church itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's, ooh, that's the $1 million question right there, isn't it, Christy? Because the thing that's coming to my mind, I feel so strongly that that we each have a part to play in bringing heaven to earth or whatever that looks like, right? Um, and it's interesting because I feel called. Richard Rohr often talks about edge of the inside is where sort of the reformer is. You can't stand on the outside of a group and say you need to change. No one's going to respond to that. You have to be on the inside saying we have to change. But I feel really strongly that, and I'm not saying that you are saying otherwise, but that like you have to feel called to stay on the edge of the inside. No one should feel like they need to do that or they're obligated to do that. And so I feel I'm like, how do we support the people who feel called to that prophetic work of, and when I think edge of the inside, I also think they're the ones like pushing to expand the size of that circle. And that is not for the faint. That's a heart. I mean, what do we you all are the Bible scholars, not necessarily me, but I do feel that the Bible tells us pretty clearly what happens to the prophets is there's not often a place that they can lay their head. And so it's really, really lonely work. And I feel so grateful when I get to accompany people who feel called to that. And I feel really grateful when people also release themselves of the burden or obligation that that's something that they need to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of those edge of the inside individuals, as Rohr often talks about, as not only pushing the boundary and extending out, but they are also often the ambassadors of hospitality and inclusion, right? Because they're often the ones that are going to first encounter the margins of whatever that looks like, right? Those that have pushed outside of traditional faith spaces or have been pushed, more marginally because of systematic systems and structures and oppressive systems and injustice. And so I think holding that space is so critically important. And so such a tender space that is important for us to name because it is one of where you are going to encounter the hurting, the triggered, those that are trying to navigate on their journey of like, is this a safe space? Like, can I get close to this? Ooh, I don't know. And what that looks like in that journey. And so, yeah. Holly, I'm talking a lot. I want to hear from you before we run out of time.
I am like, I'm just like absorbing what both of you are saying. And like, I'm having this like Holly vision moment in the middle of this. So, I am not a Bible scholar necessarily. I feel like I like had this extensive training because of childhood, and then and just a lot of proximity to it. Most of my degrees and stuff have been in the field of like mental health and trauma. But my greatest teachers I've always pointed to are like the trees. I'm very, very, very earth connected. I gain a lot of wisdom from like American indigenous cultures who, and then there's a lot of other countries too that I've connected a lot with, but just specifically because I do live here in America, just trying to gain insight from people who love the same trees that I look at now, and just trying to understand like that. And I think part of my deconstruction, which I think relates to a lot of people, is this piece of saying like in that work to reconnect with self, reconnect. There's also been this work to reconnect with the earth and reconnect with others. And part of that journey comes to this awareness, and whether you call it this or not, I would argue that there's a lot of commonality in this experience of realizing like there's something divine or something holy or something sacred in me, and there's something divine and holy sacred in you. And I see that as and that divine sacred holiness is in the trees, and it's in the hummingbird, and it's in the sleeping grizzly bear, um and it's in the mushroom. My sweet little 5-year-old son, when we every time we go on hikes and he sees mushrooms, he always gets real quiet and he whispers, "I love you" to them. It's the sweetest,
Oh my
most holy thing in the entire world.
gosh.
And like both my kids will just run up and hug trees. And yes, like they've seen me do that, but I also like I just try to give them the space to do that. And I think of this world where there are so many people who are called to fight on the inside, like what you guys are talking about. Um, and there's so much loneliness, and there's so much like you're just battling uphill against so much. And I just think of how for so long how much of that fear-based religion and oppression has just turned people away from each other, from the earth, from this light of like divineness to be like into the magic of it. Like I love the word magic. It's one of my favorite words in the world because I think it's got something that's just like childlike, but it's also holy, and it can be whatever you want it to be. And like we've lost that sense of awe and wonder. But then I think of people that are also like you're talking about, Hailey, like called to release that calling and then are on the outside of that. And yet I think there's so much that when there's been deconstruction and then there's been reconnection of like I think of like two trees growing together that may have been planted in the same soil, maybe come from the exact same tree, but one is going to grow really tall and more straight, where the other there might have been some division in it where it split off into two trees, or maybe it grows this way, or maybe it's a really thick tree, and like how much uniqueness. And I think of trees, the way that they grow together, the way their roots help communicate and nurture life. Like these trees look at each other and they're like, wow, look at you grow. Like, look at you find yourself. Look at you find your journey. And I think about that as people,
Mm.
how beautiful to live in a world where someone says, hey, I've reconnected with some kind of, a different way of Christian, whatever that is. And we're like, wow, look at you. Like, I celebrate this journey for you. Or someone says that I feel like I can finally say I'm going to walk away from this organized religion, and here's where I am right now. And we're like, wow, good for you. Like, look at you. And it's like these little shiny beacons of light in this place where everyone's turned away and it's like dark. And like these people that are holding like little flashlights, or like I see little fireflies that are just like, look, like I celebrate you. I welcome you. And I think of that as like this vision of what I like cling to and hope of what it could be, is something where there's this celebration of just human experience and the celebration of spirituality that becomes a lot more inclusive, because it's this awareness that it's so much bigger than what we can ever put into words and define and understand and comprehend. Like we have the Bible, we have scrolls, we have all these things, and how many interpretations do we have by now? Like look at the diversity of that. There's something really beautiful, but we know at our core, like there's something really foundational about love. And I don't know, I'm kind of just like rambling at this point, but
No, no, I love oh my gosh, I love everything you're saying. And it's reminding me of when I started my practice, I was like, okay, I want something to ground myself in, like, as I prioritize or make decisions or whatever, I want to be able to be like, okay, but why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And what sort of came to me was that I want to be free and offer freedom to others, or something along those lines. Not that I can really offer freedom, but it's kind of like, I am free, therefore you are free. Like and that's what I'm hearing in what you're saying, is sort of this like, oh, like I'm not threatened by your little light. I'm not made insecure by your tree offshooting over here. These are all divine expressions of how God is revealing God's truth through you, and how you are moving in alignment with that. And that is what organized religion has a really, really hard time with. It's not just Christianity. Organized religion, the emphasis on organized and probably religion has a really hard time with saying, wait, God can speak to you and specifically you in a unique way, and we don't have to like universalize it to everyone. That's really hard to label and to control and to categorize.
Mhm.
But that's what the mystics know, right? Like that's what the mystics they moved out into the deserts and they connected with creation and they lived in isolation. Not that that's what I'm saying we all have to do, but there are these lineages that we descend from that did know that the individual access to the divine is just as powerful as the holy text that we are left with.
Yeah.
But that's that's hard. That's hard for a lot of people that want to feel safe within a really specific rules and regulations that make them feel safe.
Mhm.
And I'm hearing, Holly, you have this freedom, this, to connect with the divine in all these ways that's so beautiful. Yeah. And so embodied too.
I think about it a little bit like you've got question answers
Mhm.
and you've got people who focus on the answer, right? Like you've got the question askers who I tend to think of more as our mystics in the world, right? That embrace holy curiosity and forge a path and aren't afraid to wonder and to explore and to find the beauty in, the places where most people may not stop to take time to observe and to notice the mushrooms like Hudson does.
Yeah.
Um, but then I think we have a majority of people who gravitate to where the answers are. And a lot of times it's, I just want you to tell me
Mm-hmm.
what to think and what to do. And, again, that very corporate piece of that. And so um, I think of the courage that it takes to break out from being an acceptor of answers to learning how to be a pursuer of questions and how dysregulating that is to our bodies when we leave something that is very routine and safe and structured and are exploring something that's very unpredictable and we don't know where it's going to take us and we don't know what it's going to look like. And so just like recognizing that, I think is really crucial and really key because again, it goes back to where we started, that everybody's journey is very, very unique and finding things that support your journey is really important, right? That it's not just do this, read this, listen to this, attend this, you know, finding people who get you, who understand your experiences, who can entertain your questions without always having to give you the answer. I think that's a huge red flag when we find people that want to just give you the answer instead of just let you wonder and question and support that.
I just had this like moment where you were talking and just wanted to bring it to the surface. I think when I think of like question askers, like I forget the phrasing you used. Isn't that how we all like develop in childhood? Like we have this sense of curiosity that's just innate to us as little tiny human beings. I see that as a mom right now in both my kids, and my daughter specifically is the like she's got the greatest questions and she can stump me in my tracks with her thought processes and I love it. And I feel like there is something really consistent for so many people. And like Hailey, you were sharing your story where I think especially in organized religion, you ask a question and it's here's the answer, here's the answer, here's the answer. And that almost ingrains in us this concept of like either my questions are like not worthy or I can't ask questions like I'm supposed to know the answers because they fall in this box, or like I'm always going to be fed the answer. Like there's other people who know. And I think sometimes we lose that freedom of just like asking the question. And I like the word freedom in that, like you were talking about. And I know I think that heart of reconnection can be like a way we reconnect to kind of our inner child by being willing to ask questions again and not feeling guilty about that and being curious again to just like explore and wonder. And I think that there's something really beautiful about that that then becomes whatever it's going to become for each of our journeys when we're brave enough to go back to those just like childlike essence of who we are to be like, I wonder where like mushrooms grow. And, I wonder who, and my daughter, she was like, told me over the summer had this whole idea of like the portals in the sky that were clouds because of cloud shapes. And just like I think the best thing I can do as a mom is when she's like, hey mom, what do you believe about this? And I'll be like, I don't, well, what do you believe? Like I want to know what you believe, and giving her the freedom to explore and not telling her she's wrong or right, like telling her
So
like,
good.
this is what I believe. I love that you told me that. And like, let's explore that together. Like, this is what Nana believes. And Nana's going to tell you a little bit more specifically what she believes and like
Mm-hmm.
give you permission to wrestle with like so much of what she's,
Mm-hmm.
for both my kids, are absorbing. And so I just want to like name that. I think that maybe if someone's listening, that's kind of like my challenge, I think, is if you're kind of listening and you're like, man, like I feel that sense of like I'm longing for freedom, or like I don't know where to start even. And I think there's this piece of like finding the courage to ask questions again. That's like a really beautiful starting point.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It reminds me of I don't do this very often because I try to not be prescriptive, like within my direction. Spiritual direction is a misnomer. You're not actually supposed to really direct anything, but
Mm-hmm.
every once in a while I get a little directive because there's such this conditioning of outsourcing your wisdom, right? It's like, well, we can't trust anything, any like that. At least how I was taught was like, you are sinful and the devil's always trying to sneak in here, there, or the other. So like your thoughts can't be trusted, your emotions can't be trusted. So the only truth you know to be true is like what's literally in the Bible or what this white man says from the pulpit, right? And so that conditioning of like that we lose that curiosity so early because we're conditioned that like no, the wisdom, the knowledge is out here, not in here. And that is such hard conditioning to break. Like I there every once in a while when I'm in sessions and I hear someone saying like they're in the deconstruction process or sometimes even the reconstruction process, and it's like, well, I was listening to this book or I heard this podcast or and I'm like, no more, no input at all. Like you just got to sit with your feelings and like, what do
Mm-hmm.
you think about heaven? What do you think about hell? What do you think about God? And because there's still, even as we deconstruct out of fundamentalism, we sort of reconstruct into a liberal form of fundamentalism, and we
Mm-hmm.
don't gain the skill of that curiosity and freedom in what is like emerging, what truths or wisdoms are like emerging from our own spirit. So I love that. I mean, I love that I'm not a parent, but I'm inspired by your parenting, Holly, and what a gift that you're instilling in your little ones. Yeah.
I learned a lot
Mm.
of what I know from Christy as a parent. So
Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's been good to do life together. Oh, well, I have a feeling the three of us could sit here and just keep going round and round and
I'm sure. I'm
deeper
sure.
and deeper, and it would be fantastic and wonderful. But A, I'm sure Hailey has other things to do tonight, and B, I'm sure our listeners don't want a 5-hour podcast.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Haley, will you come back and hang out with us again
Oh,
sometime, and maybe we
anytime.
can pull at some of these threads in some other spaces? Because I think I made a list of at least 5 or 6 other things we can talk about. So. Tell everyone, Hailey, how they can get connected with you, some of the ways that they can learn more about what you do, what you offer, services that you have,
Yeah,
those kind of things.
great. The best place to find me is on my website, which is just HaileyMitsui.com, HaileyMitsui.com. And I'm also on Instagram, also at Hailey Mitsui. And my primary offerings are the one-on-one spiritual direction, one-on-one somatic coaching, but I occasionally have some group somatic practices. I have that podcast I referenced. I do a lot of kind of workshops and facilitating virtually and around town. But yeah, if you ever wanted me to come to your community and do some kind of facilitating listeners out there in listener land, I would love to do that. So you're always welcome to reach out. But yeah, just kind of signing up for my newsletter on my website or following me on Instagram is always probably the best place to kind of keep track of what I'm getting into.
Fantastic. Well, we so appreciate you making time to be here with us. Thank you for a unscripted conversation that didn't necessarily have like a defined focal point, which I always love to have those and just kind of see where things go. And I think this went to some really beautiful places. So I appreciate you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Holly and I will be back next week with another conversation. So we hope you'll join us again. And until then, make sure that you check out all of Hailey's stuff online, connect with her on Instagram, and stay connected to all that she's doing and offering the world as well. So we'll see you guys back next week.